The following story is a translated and adapted conversation, recounting supernatural experiences from around the world. This content is intended for entertainment purposes only. Listen with an open mind and enjoy the thrill of the unknown. The content in this video is purely for entertainment. Viewer discretion is advised. If you are easily frightened, be prepared some stories might just send chills down your spine. If you're ready, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and immerse yourself in the world of the unexplained.
In 1993, Mogadishu was a city consumed by violence. Its streets a battleground for warlords, militias, and desperate civilians caught in the crossfire of Somalia's civil war. The collapse of the central government had plunged the country into anarchy, and Mogadishu, once a coastal gem, was now a maze of rubble and gunfire. Into this maelstrom stepped James Jim Carver, a 40-year-old British journalist for the BBC, known for his dogged reporting from conflict zones. Jim had covered the troubles in Northern Ireland and the Gulf War, his dispatches a blend of grit and empathy that gave voice to the voiceless. Jim's drive wasn't just professional ambition. As a teenager, he'd lost his younger sister to a car accident, a tragedy that left him with a gnawing guilt for not being there to save her. The loss pushed him into journalism, a way to confront the world's pain and make sense of his own. Mogadishu was his latest challenge, to report on the escalating violence between warlord factions and the impact on civilians, particularly children, who reminded him of his sister. Armed with a notebook, a digital recorder, and a Nikon camera, Jim joined a small BBC team, ignoring warnings that Mogadishu was a death spiral. The journey to Mogadishu was a plunge into dread. Jim flew into Nairobi, then hitched a ride on a UNAID plane, landing on a makeshift airstrip outside the city. The air was thick with humidity and the stench of smoke, and gunfire echoed in the distance. He joined a convoy of armored vehicles, escorted by a team of South African private security contractors. The contractors were tense, their eyes scanning for snipers and RPGs. Mogadishu's a slaughterhouse, one warned. "You don't sleep here, you survive." Jim nodded, scribbling the quote, but the words settled in his gut like a stone. Jim's assignment was to spend 5 days in Mogadishu, reporting on the warlord conflicts and the humanitarian crisis. His team included a BBC cameraman named Ayesha, a Somali-British fixer named Khalid, and their security lead, Captain Van der Merwe, a grizzled mercenary with a permanent scowl. The city was a labyrinth of destruction-shattered buildings, bullet-riddled walls, and streets littered with debris. The convoy dropped them at a safe house in the Ward Higley district, a crumbling villa that had once been a family home. The villa's walls were scarred, its windows broken, but it offered shelter, a rare luxury in a city on its knees. That first night, Jim couldn't sleep. The city roared gunfire, screams, the wail of sirens. The villa creaked, its timbers groaning like a wounded animal. He sat by a cracked window, reviewing his plan: visit refugee camps, interview militia defectors, and document the city's ruins. The villa unsettled him, its air heavy with the scent of dust and decay. He thought of his sister, of her smile, and felt a pang of guilt for being alive while she wasn't. Just another job, he told himself, gripping his recorder like a lifeline. The first 2 days were a grim parade of suffering. Jim and his team navigated Mogadishu's dangers, their armored SUV dodging checkpoints and stray bullets. They visited a refugee camp where families huddled in tents, their eyes hollow from hunger and loss. Jim's recorder captured their stories: mothers mourning children, fathers broken by war. Aisha's camera clicked, her footage stark and unflinching, while Khalid translated, his face etched with the pain of returning to his homeland. The city felt alive, its ruins pulsing with anger and grief. On the third day, Khalid suggested exploring a residential area near the port, where a wealthy family had once lived before being massacred by militias in 1991. The villa they were staying in was part of that neighborhood, its history whispered among locals. "That house is bad," Khalid said, his voice low. "The family was killed, father, mother, 3 children, their blood's still in the walls." He warned them not to linger at night, his eyes dark with fear. "The jinn live there now." Jim nodded, dismissing it as folklore, but Khalid's words lingered, stirring an unease he couldn't shake. The team spent the day interviewing survivors in the port area, their stories echoing Khalid's warning. The villa was cursed, a place where the dead didn't rest. A local elder, Abdi, described the massacre in chilling detail: militia fighters storming the house, gunning down the family as they begged for mercy. "The children's screams never stopped," he said. "You hear them at night." Jim scribbled the quote, his hand trembling, the villa's presence growing heavier in his mind. Back at the villa, the team settled in for another night. The house was darker, its broken windows letting in the sea breeze, sharp with salt and decay. Jim worked in a small room on the second floor, its single window shattered, the glass jagged like teeth. He set up his recorder and laptop, transcribing interviews, but the villa's atmosphere weighed on him. The air was thick, the silence oppressive, broken only by the creak of the floorboards and the distant pop of gunfire. Around midnight, Jim noticed a chill, the room growing colder despite the humid night. He glanced at the window and froze a small handprint had appeared on the glass from the outside. It was child-sized, the fingers splayed, the palm smeared with a dark, wet stain that looked like blood. His heart pounded, his breath shallow. The villa was surrounded by a high wall, and the room was on the second floor. No child could have reached it, and no one was outside. He grabbed his flashlight, its beam trembling as he aimed it at the window. The handprint glistened, the stain dripping slightly, as if freshly made. Jim called Aisha and Khalid, his voice shaking. They stared at the handprint, their faces pale. "It's a trick," Aisha said, but her tone was uncertain. Khalid muttered a prayer, his beads clicking. Jim raised his camera to photograph it, but as he focused, the handprint vanished, the glass clean and dry. His stomach twisted, a sense of being watched pressing against him. "Did you see that?" he asked. But Aisha and Khalid only nodded, their eyes wide. The room felt smaller, the shadows deeper, as if the villa was closing in. Then they heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like knuckles on wood, coming from the front door downstairs. The sound was deliberate, almost polite, but it carried a weight that chilled Jim's blood. Van der Merwe, stationed near the door, checked the perimeter with his team, but found nothing, no footprints, no signs of intrusion. The tapping continued, sporadic but insistent, moving from the door to the walls, then the windows, as if circling the house. No one spoke, the team frozen, their flashlights casting jittery beams. Jim's recorder was running, but when he checked it later, it captured only static, the tapping absent. The next day, the team was shaken, their work mechanical. Jim interviewed more survivors, but his mind was on the villa. The handprint haunted him, its image burned into his memory. Aisha's footage was off-frames blurred, shadows too dark, as if the camera was seeing something they couldn't. Khalid grew quieter, his prayers constant, while Van der Merwe's team doubled their patrols, their rifles at the ready. The city felt heavier, its ruins alive with a malice Jim couldn't explain. That night, they returned to the villa, unable to find another safe house. Jim's dread intensified, the handprint's memory a constant weight. He set up in the same room, his recorder and camera ready, but the villa's atmosphere was different, colder, thicker, as if it was waiting. Around 1 a.m., the tapping returned, louder, more urgent, coming from multiple points: the door, the windows, the ceiling. Jim's flashlight flickered, its beam dimming as the temperature plummeted. His breath fogged in the air and his teeth chattered. Then he saw it again, the handprint, reappearing on the window, its stain darker, more vivid, as if the blood was fresh. But this time, there were more smaller prints, overlapping, covering the glass like a child's frantic plea. Jim's heart hammered, his camera trembling as he snapped photos. The prints didn't vanish, but the camera's display showed only static, the images corrupted. The tapping became a pounding, a cacophony that shook the walls, accompanied by a low, guttural moan that seemed to come from inside the house. Jim's mind flooded with images: children screaming, a family gunned down, blood pooling on the villa's floors. The visions weren't his, but they felt real, as if the house was forcing him to see its pain. His sister's face appeared among the dead, her eyes accusing. "Why didn't you save me?" Jim's chest tightened, guilt and fear colliding. He called for Aisha and Khalid, but their voices were distant, drowned by the moan, which grew into a wailer child's cry, raw and anguished, filling the villa. Jim stumbled to the window, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't resist. The handprints pulsed, their stains spreading like ink. The wail was everywhere, inside his head, inside his bones. He felt watched, not by one presence, but by many, their gaze boring into his soul. Then he saw her, a girl, no older than 8, standing outside the window. Her form faint, translucent, clad in a tattered dress soaked with blood. Her face was a blur, a void where eyes and mouth should have been, but her presence was a weight, crushing Jim's resolve. The girl didn't move, but her void face locked on him, and Jim felt a jolt, as if she was peeling back his soul, his guilt for his sister, his failure to stop the world's pain, his own survival. The wail came from her, a sound that wasn't just grief, but rage, a demand for justice that pierced his heart. The handprints multiplied, covering the walls, the floor, leaving bloody streaks that dripped like tears. The villa darkened, the shadows curling around Jim, their edges sharp like claws. His flashlight died, plunging him into near darkness. The girl's form the only light, a sickly glow that burned his eyes. More figures appeared faint, flickering shapes in the corners. A family, their faces blurred, their hands reaching. The visions intensified: militia, fighters laughing, children clawing at the walls. A mother's final scream as she shielded her daughter. Jim's scream caught in his throat, his body paralyzed by a terror he'd never known, not in Belfast, not in Kuwait, not anywhere. The girl raised a hand, her fingers skeletal, and the handprints moved, crawling across the glass, reaching for him. The wail became a chorus, voices of the family: father, mother, children begging, cursing, accusing. "Run," a voice shouted, Khalid's, sharp and desperate. The command broke Jim's paralysis. He grabbed his camera and bolted, the wail chasing him through the villa. The shadows lunged, their touch cold and grasping, snagging at his clothes. He stumbled downstairs, where Aisha and Vanda Merwi were shouting, their faces pale. The pounding was deafening, the walls shaking as if the villa was alive. Jim burst outside, collapsing in the street, the wail fading but the silence worse heavy, alive, watching. Dawn broke over Mogadishu, pale and harsh, the city's ruins shrouded in dust. The team packed up, their faces pale, their eyes avoiding Jim's. Van der Merwe ordered an immediate retreat to a UN compound, the mission abandoned. Jim checked his camera, but the photos were corrupted streaks of red. Shadowy figures in every frame, and one clear image. The girl, her void face staring through the window, her hand pressed against the glass, leaving a bloody print. He deleted it, his hands trembling, but the image was seared into his mind. As they drove away, the villa loomed in the rearview mirror, its windows like eyes tracking their escape. Jim heard the tapping one last time, faint but clear, coming from behind. He didn't look back, afraid of what he'd see. At the compound, a chopper evased them to Nairobi. The team silent, their faces a blur. Khalid, dropping Jim at the airport, noticed his pallor. "You saw her," he said, not a question. Jim nodded, unable to speak. "She doesn't leave," Khalid murmured, echoing Abdi's warning. Back in London, Jim tried to move on. He wrote his dispatch, a stark account of Mogadishu's ruins, but omitted the girl and the handprints. The words felt empty, inadequate against the horror he'd seen. The villa clung to him, a shadow that darkened his days. He couldn't sleep without hearing the wail, couldn't walk alone without feeling those voidies. His dreams were haunted by the girl, by the family, by his sister's face, accusing him of failure. Jim stopped taking conflict assignments, his passion for journalism dimmed by the weight of Mogadishu. The camera from the villa sat in a locked box, its lens covered, as if to keep something trapped. Sometimes at night, he heard tapping soft, rhythmic, coming from his apartment's windows. He never looked, afraid of what he'd see, but the handprints lingered in his mind, a stain that wouldn't fade. A year later, a colleague found a single print from Jim's Mogadishu trip, slipped into a folder of unrelated photos. It showed the villa's window, empty except for a small, bloody handprint, its edges blurred like a screen frozen in time. The print was streaked with red, as if the blood had seeped through the paper. Jim burned it, his hands trembling, but the mark lingered, a reminder that some houses never let go. In the autumn of 2022, the Russia-Ukraine war had transformed Ukraine's fertile plains into a landscape of devastation. The city of Kherson, recently liberated from Russian occupation, was a focal point of destruction, its surrounding villages scarred by shelling, mass graves, and the lingering trauma of occupation. Into this ravaged region stepped Nadia Petrova, a 35-year-old Ukrainian-Canadian journalist working for Al Jazeera, known for her poignant dispatches from conflict zones. Nadia had covered Syria and Yemen, her reports blending raw emotion with unflinching truth, giving voice to those silenced by war. Nadia's drive wasn't just professional duty. Born in Kiju, she'd fled to Canada as a teenager during the 1990s, carrying memories of her grandfather's stories about Soviet oppression and the Holodomor famine. His death in 2014, during the annexation of Crimea, fueled her resolve to document Ukraine's fight for survival. Kherson was her personal mission, to report on the impact of Russian occupation on rural communities, exposing the war's toll on civilians. Armed with a notebook, a digital recorder, and a Sony Alpha camera, Nadia ventured into a village near Kherson, ignoring warnings that the area was a ghost. The journey to Kherson was a descent into desolation. Nadia flew into Kyiv, then joined a humanitarian convoy heading south, their vans rattling through roads pocked with craters. The air was crisp with autumn chill, thick with the stench of smoke and decay. Ukrainian soldiers manned checkpoints, their faces weary, while the horizon flickered with distant artillery. Kherson's free, but it's bleeding, a driver muttered. "The villagers are worse." Nadia nodded, scribbling the quote, but the words settled in her chest like a warning. Her assignment was to spend 4 days in a village called Velika Alexandrivka, documenting the aftermath of Russian occupation-destroyed homes, displaced families, and rumors of atrocities. Her team included a Al Jazeera cameraman named Alexei, local fixer named Irina, and a Ukrainian military escort led by Lieutenant Kovalenko, a stoic officer with haunted eyes. The village was a shadow of itself. Houses gutted, fields abandoned, the air heavy with grief. The convoy dropped them at a makeshift base, a schoolhouse with shattered windows and bullet-riddled walls. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the wind and the occasional bark of a stray dog. That first night, Nadia couldn't sleep. The village moaned creaking timbers, distant shelling, the wail of mourners. She sat by a cracked window, reviewing her plan: interview survivors, photograph the ruins, and explore the fields where locals said mass graves had been dug. The fields entreat her, symbol of Ukraine's heartland, now tainted by war. But they also unnerved her. Their vastness, a reminder of her grandfather's tales of hidden graves. Just another job, she told herself, gripping her recorder, but a quiet dread settled in her gut. The first 2 days were a grim parade of loss. Nadia and her team trekked through the village, their boots crunching on shattered glass. They interviewed families who'd endured occupation, their stories chilling: executions, torture, children orphaned by shelling. Nadia's recorder captured their voices, but each tale felt like a weight, piling onto her own guilt for living safely in Canada while Ukraine suffered. Alexei's camera clicked, his footage stark and haunting, while Irina translated, her eyes darting to the fields, as if expecting danger. On the second day, Irina led them to a survivor, an elderly farmer named Petro, who'd hidden from Russian troops in his cellar. He described the fields beyond the village, once lush with wheat, now a graveyard. They buried soldiers there, he said, his voice low. Ours and theirs. No markers, just dirt. He warned them to avoid the fields at night, his eyes dark with fear. The dead don't rest. They whisper in the wind. Petro spoke of a scarecrow in the largest field, erected by villagers to ward off looters, but now avoided. It's not right, he said. It moves when it shouldn't. Nadia noted the story, dismissing it as folklore, but Petros' words lingered, stirring unease. That afternoon, the team photographed a burned-out church, its icons defaced, its pews splintered. Nadia felt the village's grief, its silence heavier than the shelling. Alexei's photos were off-shadows too dark, figures faintly visible in the corners. Irina grew quieter, her prayers soft but constant. Kovalenko and his squad were tense, their radios crackling with reports of Russian stragglers. As dusk fell, Nadia decided to visit the fields, drawn by Petro's story and the need for a powerful image to anchor her report. The fields were a short walk, but the village felt alive, its ruins pulsing with a malice she couldn't explain. The field was a sea of wilted stalks, its edges marked by shell craters and rusted barbed wire. The scarecrow stood at its center, a crude figure of sticks and cloth, its silhouette stark against the fading sun. Nadia's camera clicked, capturing the desolation, but the scarecrow drew her eye. Its clothes were tattered, a mix of civilian rags and military fatigues, patched together like a corpse. The wind stirred, and the scarecrow swayed, its movement almost human, as if it was turning to watch her. Nadia's heart quickened, a chill running down her spine. She approached, Alexei and Irina trailing behind Kovalenko's squad, patrolling the field's perimeter. The air was cold, the wind carrying a faint, metallic tint, like blood. The field was silent. The village's sounds, dogs, wind, distant voices, muffled as if the earth was swallowing them. Nadia's recorder ran, capturing the quiet, but each step felt intrusive, as if the field resented her presence. The scarecrow loomed closer, its cloth face a burlap sack, featureless but somehow watchful. She thought of Petro's warning of the graves beneath the field, and felt a prickle of dread, a sense that she wasn't alone. As Nadia photographed the scarecrow, the wind gusted, and she swore it moved, not just swayed, but shifted, its arms twitching like a puppet's. She blinked, dismissing it as a trick of the light, but the unease grew. She zoomed in, her camera's lens revealing details. The fatigues were Ukrainian, stained with dark patches that looked like blood. The civilian clothes were torn, a child's scarf among them. Her stomach twisted, the realization dawning that the scarecrow was dressed in the belongings of the dead. Then she heard it, a faint whisper, like voices murmuring in Ukrainian, coming from the scarecrow's direction. The words were indistinct, a mix of pleas and curses carried on the wind. Nadia froze, her flashlight swinging across the field, but the beam revealed only stalks and shadows. Alexei, she called, but he was yards away, his camera trained on the horizon. Ariana's face paled, her prayers halting. The whisper came again, closer, a chorus of voices, men, women, children speaking in fragments. Help us. Why? Stay. Nadia's skin prickled, her heart pounding, the field's silence now a living thing, watching. She checked her camera, reviewing recent shots. Her breath caught. In one photo, the scarecrow's burlap face had eyes dark, hollow pits that weren't there before, staring directly at the lens. The image was grainy, but the eyes were unmistakable, a void that chilled her blood. She showed Irina, who gasped, her hand clutching a cross necklace. It's them, Irina whispered, the dead. Nadia tried to rationalize it, a glitch, a shadow, but the whisper returned. Now a low, guttural moan, coming from the scarecrow itself. Nadia stepped closer, driven by a mix of fear and compulsion. The field grew colder, the wind stilling, the air thick with the scent of earth and decay. Her flashlight flickered, its beam dimming as the temperature plummeted. Her breath fogged, her teeth chattering. The moan became a wail, a piercing cry that seemed to rise from the ground, shaking the stalks. Nadia's mind flooded with images: soldiers gunned down, villagers executed, bodies piled in shallow graves. The visions weren't hers, but they felt real, as if the field was forcing her to see its pain. She raised her camera, snapping photos blindly, hoping to capture something. The wail grew louder, a chorus of voices: soldiers, civilians, children begging, cursing, accusing. Then she saw it, a figure, faint and translucent, standing where the scarecrow should have been. It was a soldier, his uniform Ukrainian, his chest a ruin of blood and bone. His face was a void, a black hole where eyes and mouth should have been, but his presence was a weight, crushing Nadia's resolve. The wail came from him, a sound that wasn't just grief, but rage, a demand for justice that pierced her soul. Nadia's legs buckled, and she fell to her knees, her camera slipping from her grip. The soldier's void face locked on her, and she felt a jolt, as if he was peeling back her soul, her guilt for leaving Ukraine, her failure to save her grandfather, her own survival. The wail became a chorus, voices of the field's dead farmers, children, soldiers screaming in Ukrainian. Why did you leave us? The field darkened, the stalks curling around Nadia, their tips sharp like claws. Her flashlight died, plunging her into near darkness. The soldiers formed the only light, a sickly glow that burned her eyes. More figures appeared, faint, flickering shapes in the field, their faces blurred, their hands reaching. The visions intensified, Russian tanks rolling through, villagers shot in the streets, a child buried alive. Nadia's scream caught in her throat, her body paralyzed by a terror she'd never known, not in Aleppo, not in Sana, not anywhere. The soldier moved closer, his steps silent but deliberate, his void face inches from hers. She felt hands, cold, skeletal, grazing her skin, tugging at her clothes. The wail became a demand, "Stay with us," in voices that weren't human but a blend of pain and rage. "Run," a voice shouted, Rinna's, sharp and desperate. The command broke Nadia's paralysis. She grabbed her camera and bolted, the wail chasing her through the field. The stalks lunged, their tips snagging at her clothes, as if the field was alive. She stumbled into Alexei and Irina, their faces pale, their flashlights flickering. The wail was deafening, the earth trembling as if the graves were opening. They burst through the field's edge, collapsing in the village, the wail fading, but the silence worst heavy, alive, watching. Dawn broke over Velika Oleksandrovka, pale and cold, the village's ruins shrouded in mist. The team sat in the schoolhouse, their hands shaking, their eyes avoiding Nadia's. Kovalenko ordered an immediate retreat to Kherson, the mission abandoned. Nadia checked her camera, but the photos were corrupted streaks of grey, shadowy figures in every frame, and one clear image, the scarecrow, its void face staring, its arms raised as if reaching. She deleted it, her hands trembling, but the image was seared into her mind, a wound that wouldn't heal. As they drove away, the field loomed in the rearview mirror, the scarecrow a dark silhouette against the dawn. Nadia heard the whisper one last time, faint but clear, coming from behind. She didn't look back, afraid of what she'd see. In Kherson, a convoy evaced them to Kizhu, the team silent, their faces a blur. Irina, dropping Nadia at the airport, noticed her pallor. "You heard them," she said, not a question. Nadia nodded, unable to speak. "They don't leave," Irina murmured, echoing Petro's warning. Back in Toronto, Nadia tried to move on. She filed her report with Al Jazeera, describing Kherson's ruins but omitting the scarecrow. The words felt empty, inadequate against the horror she'd seen. The field clung to her, a shadow that darkened her days. She couldn't sleep without hearing the wail, couldn't hold her camera without feeling that cold grip. Her dreams were haunted by the soldier, by the field's dead, by her grandfather's face accusing her of failure. Nadia stopped taking war assignments, her passion for journalism dimmed by the weight of Kherson. The camera from the field sat in a locked box, its lens covered, as if to keep something trapped. Sometimes, at night, she heard whispers, soft, in Ukrainian, coming from her apartment's corners. She never looked, afraid of what she'd see, but the scarecrow's void face lingered in her mind, a stain that wouldn't fade. A year later, a colleague found a single print from Nadia's Kherson trip, slipped into a folder of unrelated photos. It showed the field, empty except for the scarecrow, its void face staring, its arms blurred as if moving. The print was streaked with red, as if blood had seeped through the paper. Nadia burned it, her hands trembling, but the whisper lingered, a reminder that some fields never let go.